50% of women abandon their careers in tech by the age of 35.
We think that's unacceptable, and it's exactly why we started this podcast.
I'm Jo Keneally, tech veteran and writer.
And I'm Jarisha Nadaraju, product ops leader and startup advisor.
We're The Other Half, a podcast for ambitious women navigating their way.
This episode is brought to you by PCX Pay, helping businesses move money across borders with speed, clarity, and control. Simplify your payments infrastructure at pcxpay.com. We've partnered with Clue for Season 3 of The Other Half. Clue is the science-backed period and cycle tracking app that helps you understand your body, from cycle predictions and hormone insights to fertility tracking and mood patterns. As a listener of The Other Half, you have exclusive access to a whole free year of Clue Plus. Just head to the link in the show notes to claim it.
On today's episode, we're joined by Julie Ngo, founder of Hundun Labs, a gaming studio. We discuss her transition from lawyer to founder, on why you should start before you're ready, and the realities of fundraising as a female founder. Welcome to The Other Half, Julie. How are you doing?
Thanks, Jo. Really good, thanks. How are you? Thanks for having me here.
Oh, no, delighted that you've joined us. We're going to just jump straight into it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So, Julie, looking at your LinkedIn, you've had a really interesting career from, training at a top city law firm to working in government for a while, then moving in-house to fintechs, numerous fintechs, including TrueLayer, where the three of us first met many, many years ago. And now you're a founder. Was there a specific moment looking back where you just knew that corporate law wasn't going to be for you for the long term?
That's quite a funny question because I was part of a graduate scheme at Hundun Labs, and basically it was within week one that I was in the canteen at Hundun Labs, and there I was with another friend and colleague, and we just sort of sat down at lunch and looked at each other and we just thought, this isn't it, is it? We literally both said the same thing. And we are actually still friends today, but it was very early on that we both realized, well, I realized especially, that it wasn't the right path for me. But for various reasons, I stuck with it. Having said that, it was such a great environment to work in, to be honest. It was an amazing training ground and an amazing team to have worked with. So I feel very privileged to have had that experience.
When you say, and week one is very soon to know, but I think when you know, you know. But when you say that there was something about it that just wasn't for you, what was that? And did you find that, were you looking for that thing when you were transitioning into tech, or was that more of a kind of an organic pivot?
I think back then, so I moved to London in 2010 and took up the training contract in 2010. And back then, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of the thinking around career paths, and I was simply pursuing what was prestigious because that was what was expected. I had done really well at university, and I had applied for various jobs in Australia and the UK and had been offered this role. So I was just following a path that I thought was the right path, even if I hadn't really taken a step back to reflect on what I really wanted. And so I also didn't have the language back then to explain what I was feeling in the same way that I do now with benefit of experience and hindsight. So I don't think it was actually something I ever wanted to do. It was just a result of certain circumstances, such as having a massive student loan and feeling a need to pay it off as quickly as possible, leading me into a very stable corporate job.
Makes sense. Yeah, student loans are definitely a burden. And then, so you moved from a very stable corporate job into startups, which is less stable. Did you seek out those opportunities to work in tech, or did they find you?
I think when I was looking to leave, I was so, in a way, desperate for any opportunity outside of a private law practice that I was looking for any in-house role. And I ended up taking a role with the government legal department in the Home Office. It was quite hard to find opportunities that would, one, interview quite a junior lawyer, and interview a junior lawyer who had a very specific banking and finance experience. And so it was incredibly hard to convince employers that the skills that I'd learned in that context were really transferable. And bizarrely, the Home Office and Government Legal Department were one employer who were willing to look at what I had to offer. So as soon as that came up, I just sort of jumped at it because I felt it was a great chance to get some in-house legal experience. And then obviously when I landed there, because I hadn't really reflected very much about what I actually wanted, it didn't feel like the right fit as soon as I got there. Again, repeating the same mistake that I'd made when I was in the corporate role.
I was just nodding along, Julie, and I've known you for a while, but I don't think I've heard you articulate that, like as your origin story and how you ended up getting, into tech and moving there. But it's so similar to me. So you a lawyer, I was an accountant. I studied actuarial science in university and then pivoted and then kind of was just following this path that was in a way like prestigious and, what you think you're supposed to do. And very much like how you knew in that first week, I knew as soon as I was in auditing articles, that this was not for me. Like I just didn't fit in. And I think it's so interesting how you can go like that and then kind of end up finding your way into a similar place because, where we ended up meeting was TrueLayer, which was in tech and kind of finding ourselves there. So I love listening to that. Very interesting. I'm gonna maybe, I guess, fast forward a little bit. You pivoted and you moved, and then in 2016, while you were working as a lawyer, you founded your first company, Adrena, which was a sustainable sportswear brand. I think I actually have 2 pieces from your collection, like in my house. But what was it that inspired you to launch a fashion business, and how did your personal values and background shape the brand?
So this was when I was still working at the Home Office, and I realized I was finishing my work at about 1 or 2 p.m. every day. So I literally had a lot of time to think about things. And so I used that mental space that I suddenly found myself having to reflect on what I cared about. And one of the things I do care about is sustainability, climate, and environment. And I think it was about the time that there was a documentary, the name escapes me now, but it was a documentary about fast fashion and how clothing is produced and how fashion is completely unsustainable in its production methods. So to be able to drive prices down, you have to have mass production. And so this got me thinking about there must be an alternative to having this mass consumption culture. And that was what Adrena was all about. It was about having a different way of consuming, and it used just-in-time manufacturing and customization to basically only produce what we need to a high quality standard. I mean, looking back on it now, it was so naive, but it was an amazing experience at the same time. And so that was a process of just trying to work out and discover what my values were. And it came in the shape of this brand, which I then launched and left the Home Office role to try and work on full time.
I wonder, you say it's naive, but do you think about that time when you reflect on like past Julie or young Julie who, read this article and then went out and just did it? Do you kind of look back on that fondly, or what do you make of yourself doing that back then?
I'm actually super proud that I did it because I think that there was definitely a sense of feeling trapped in a particular path. And actually, when I was working up the courage to actually quit my job to do this full time, I really had to separate my own personal self from my profession. So I'd always been tied to the idea that I was always going to be a legal professional, I was going to be a lawyer, and that came with a certain sense of identity. And so I was very attached personally to that professional identity. And so I went through a lot of internal turmoil trying to separate myself from that idea. And, there's a lot of thought processes around what will people think of me? They'll think I've just gone through all of this work for nothing and thrown it out and taken a massive risk for something that is not going to work out. And what got me over the edge was the thought of what would we actually regret at the end of the day. It really was the idea that, we always regret the things that we don't do and the risks that we don't take. And I knew that my legal career was always going to be there if I needed to go back to it, which is eventually what did happen, but it did take quite a long time for me to go through that internal reflection and thought process.
I mean, you're touching on it already, Julie, which I was going to ask you about lessons that you've learned from doing that venture, you know, that you maybe carried into the second venture that you're doing now. But it sounds like you're already mentioning some of them, which is the separation of, you know, yourself and your identity tied to like work and reflecting on that. Is there anything else that you learned going into the second one?
Absolutely, have a great business partner. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who can run a business on their own, but I'm certainly not one of those people. And that was a massive learning that I took away from Adrena, which is I am a realist, but sometimes that comes across as cynicism or pessimism. And having a business partner who's there with you day to day to sort of push you along, and then you in turn push them along when they're having those moments is super important. And I think you can basically get further if that is the way that you like to work. And having someone to talk to on a day-to-day basis and support you is really important.
We're going to jump into that co-founder relationship a bit more in a while, but I think what you're building is so interesting because if we fast forward now to your second venture, last year, I believe, you decided to, again, leave your job and start Hundun Labs. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yep, Hundun Labs.
Which is a gaming company. So very different to fintech and also very different to sustainable fashion. Was gaming and I guess XR an area you were always interested in, or how did this come about?
I've always been a casual gamer, so I grew up with a lot of different consoles as a childhood. I've always been curious about virtual reality and had tried it a few times, but unfortunately, I'm someone who gets a little bit nauseous when trying some of these immersive experiences. So it wasn't something that I did daily. But what happened was sort of in the middle of last year, I was feeling quite burnt out from my role, and I was catching up with our old colleague Arthur to work out, you know, what he was doing and what he was up to, because I was sort of at a loss as to what steps to take next. And he mentioned that he was working on this idea for a virtual reality game, and I got really excited by it. The idea is basically an immersive virtual reality music experience called Jam Sesh. And the idea is that you can bring friends into the game, create your own bands and band identity, and then battle each other to your favorite music and have this amazing experience formed around music, which is another love of mine. So it seemed to bring together two loves of my life in a very strangely well-timed way, in that both Arthur and I were looking for different things and something new to work on. And so that's in a way, it was very serendipitous and it came together. We started working together on it a little bit and it just started building a lot of momentum. So we ended up just accelerating from that point and building it out into a studio called Hundun Labs.
I really like that it's brought, you know, your different passions together, like from, you know, you being a child playing on various consoles to now music as well. And you mentioned it built momentum pretty quickly. When you first thought about, you know, joining or I guess starting this company, in your mind were you like, I am ready to go in on this, or was it more of a like a step-by-step approach? And how did you know it was the moment to really go for it?
When I first started, it definitely wasn't a feeling of I want to go all in on this. It was more just enthusiasm and excitement for a concept. So Arthur would describe it as falling through a door of enthusiasm, and it was just so easy when we first met to talk about how to build it, and suddenly it just everything sort of seemed to fall together. That's his perspective apparently. But I basically was in the mindset of it's super exciting as an idea. I'm really unsure about lots of different things about it, but why don't I just take really small steps and see what happens? I think it's about being open to those potential opportunities and seeing what happens, seeing if you start talking about it with other people, how does it feel? If you start actually doing this small thing like setting up a domain and putting together a deck, how does it feel? And I think it's the idea that any step you take is never really permanent. You can always pull back from it. It's not like a one-way door. And actually, if you just try something, you'll be amazed by where it will get you in terms of the progress when you look back.
There is a lot to be said for following your curiosity and your enthusiasm. I also think when you find that natural ease and that chemistry with someone, things do just build a lot quicker. And that's usually a very good sign that you're on the right path, even if you have no idea what is coming ahead.
Yeah.
I'm not a gamer at all. I had one console briefly as a child, and I think, I played Tony Hawk's on a Game Boy Color, and that was it. But gaming, from an outsider's perspective, it is known as a very like male-dominated industry. I think particularly people building gaming companies. How's your experience been entering that world?
I would say that, yes, you're right. It is, unfortunately, from what I've seen so far at gaming conferences like Game Dev Conference in San Francisco, the crowd of people building games is predominantly male. And unfortunately, I think there's some very minority cases of overtly sexist messaging around women in the gaming space. Despite that, I have found a really rich group of people who are incredibly welcoming and friendly and supportive of women in the gaming space. And that includes men and women and everyone in between.
It's reminiscent of, I don't know, Judy, if law was male dominated or even going into tech or fintech in a way. At least for me, I've also felt like I've just been in those rooms where it is male dominated. So I don't know if this is something where if you've experienced it before, you already know that this might be the case. And so in a way, you are maybe seeking out those bright spots or the good, or who are these people that you can gravitate towards, because it's always a decent group, even in those spaces. I'm not sure if like your background and career and navigating any male dominated spaces like prepared you for gaming, or was it very different or just the same?
Teresa, I think a lot of what you say makes sense. Like, yes, I have been in a lot of male-dominated industries. So fintech is a classic example where you go to any business and typically it's like 33% to 40% women. I think it does sort of help in a way in that you unfortunately are not surprised when you come across another male dominated industry. On the other hand, I don't know if my experience is representative. So I've never worked in a very large gaming corporation or a business. I have just started my own gaming studio, which is very small, super friendly, and very evenly spread in representation, which we're definitely going to try and maintain. So it's perhaps not a representative view of what it's actually like out there.
I love that you mentioned that Hundun Labs is a space that's friendly and representation matters, and obviously the two of you as co-founders are going to keep that in mind as you grow it, which is awesome. That's what we need more of, I think, is founders like that who are keeping that front of mind. So, Judy, we touched on this a little bit, and I guess we're circling back to it. You've gone from founding a company as a solo founder, Adrena, and now you've co-founded Hundun Labs with Arthur, who is also an ex-colleague of ours. How has that been different?
Between Adrena and Hundun Labs.
Mm.
It's been really different because when I was building Adrena, I was just relying solely on myself. And it was extremely hard because I became a bottleneck for everything. I was driving everything, but I was also restricting everything because there's only so much capacity that can flow through one person. And I was also limited by my lack of knowledge and personal limitations. Whereas when working with a co-founder, especially someone like Arthur, he's got a skill set that I've never developed. And I've got a skill set that he's never developed. And so we've already doubled the coverage that we can have across so many different parts. He also brings a very different perspective to me on a lot of things. And so decision making becomes a lot better, in my opinion, when working with someone else. So I think it's been night and day in terms of what's happened. We've also been able to get further much faster. So Adrena was in development for a year before I even launched it to anyone. I'd been thinking about it, speaking to people for a year, whereas Hundun Labs, we've already got a prototype and it's only been 5 or 6 months.
How much of that, Judy, I'm so curious to know, do you think is also a reflection of just your own personal growth, right? Compared to where you were then even though you were a solo founder, but where you are now, just in terms of your own self-awareness or growth and any of that you're bringing into this partnership with Arthur?
I think a lot actually. So yeah, we haven't talked about this, but in between Adrena and Hundun Labs, I've led legal teams at TrueLayer, ClearPay, and ClearScore, and so all of them very different, but either early stage or scaling or public fintech companies. And so a lot of that has been contributed to a lot of my personal growth as a person and also my skill set. And actually, the level of confidence I have is really different. And so I feel that on a day-to-day basis. So when I was working on Adrena, even though it was revenue generating, I was really scared of pitching Adrena as a business. There was a lack of confidence that was innate to that business. Whereas with Hundun Labs, I have a vision for what it could be, and being able to have those conversations has been really, really material in making a difference as to how it's received.
That's amazing. And it just reminds me, we spoke to somebody who you know on this podcast, so Leslie Saki, and she spoke a lot about, trusting yourself and backing yourself and
Yeah.
having, the confidence in your ability. And just you talking about it like that almost shows that growth in a way of, in a way, just having the stronger sense of self and your own opinion on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as women, it's actually quite hard in terms of developing that confidence. And I only saying this because as part of Hundun Labs, we've gone and pitched and demoed the product to school kids to, one, get feedback on what we're building, and two, to also to teach kids about entrepreneurship and present it as a potential pathway for them. And typically what I'm seeing in a lot of these classrooms, I'm not a teacher or anything or educator, but I'm seeing there's a huge divide between the engagement we get from the boys and the girls in the class. So the boys are really engaged. I'm talking about students of around GCSE level, and the girls in a lot of these schools that I've been to, many of them state schools, are just not that engaged in these topics. And I'm not saying that they have to be, and everyone goes through a different phase of development, but what came through for me in those interactions was a real thin feeling of self-esteem and how vulnerable that is for women and girls as they're going through their development. So it was just something that I'd observed and is super interesting and made me reflect about my own journey in confidence and self-esteem.
Wow. I don't, it might sound unrelated, a question, but I feel like some of it is related to what you've just said because, Judy, you partake in a lot of hobbies outside of work.
A red flag.
No, it's not a red flag, actually. I think it relates maybe to this confidence. And, when you're talking about kids, and I'm just picturing the things that they're exposed to at a young age. But, you're a skateboarder, a surfer, you're a lover of art. It's not the typical hobbies that people associate with lawyers or tech professionals. How have these passions, especially like skateboarding, which you went back to, well, you didn't even go back to, I think you started as an adult, how did that influence your career decisions and the way you approach building businesses?
I think it's the other way around. I think my career decisions have influenced me picking up these hobbies, to be honest. So it goes back to the idea of shedding an identity that's very tied to my professional identity. And I realized in the process of doing that, I was clinging to the concept of failure being a really bad thing. There's tons of people who talk about failure and what it actually is, and everyone should be ready to fail. And I think the thing is, I really liked doing these extremely challenging things because at heart, I've been brought up as a perfectionist, and I've grown up to become a very perfectionist in a lot of things I do. And I don't think that tends to allow people to have a very good growth mindset, which you definitely need to have in order to have the resilience to take risks and do the things that I want to do. So because of that, I gravitated towards activities that were really difficult and really hard to learn. Surfing is a really hard sport to learn. So in my mind, it was the thought that, well, it's so hard, I'm never going to be great at it, so who cares? And so it sort of helped me shed this idea of being perfect at it, and it didn't matter. And so when I started doing it, I was awful. It was terrible. Like I couldn't stand up until maybe like the third or fourth time I tried it. And then by that time, I was hooked. I loved the idea. I loved being in nature. I loved being in the ocean, which I've always loved, having grown up in Australia. And then I just kept doing it and then got better and better. And skateboarding similarly was something that I actually picked up during lockdown because I needed a way to keep trying to practice how to surf. And skateboarding actually came from surfing. So I figured it would be a great way to learn, but then I've since discovered that it's a whole completely different discipline in itself. And skateboarding, more than any other sport whatsoever, has failure baked into it. If you approach learning any trick, you have to approach it accepting you're probably going to fail 100, 200, 400, 600 times before you land the trick. And every skateboarder or every person who tries skateboarding knows this. And it's actually one of the best things about this sport.
Julie, that's amazing. And I've actually seen you teach a little girl, Arthur's daughter actually, how to skateboard. And I think that's so wonderful. And it kind of ties in with you talking about going to the schools and seeing that, that difference in confidence and all of that. And then, skateboarding, as you said, it's like something that taught you about failure. And like here you are teaching a young girl how to skateboard. I think that's so powerful and that's really amazing.
I think everyone should skateboard. It sounds really, really weird.
I will definitely take that consideration on board, but given my low tolerance to falling, I might try to find another way to fail that is less concrete based. Um,
It hurts. Yeah.
yeah. As you were speaking about your hobbies and like you're a great artist as well, I was thinking about like the particularly surfing and skateboarding, but also your art. There is like a theme through them that they're all quite, I don't want to say, well, maybe I do want to say revolutionary, but like they have a theme that is linked often to like freedom and people thinking or living differently. If you think of like surfers in old California and skateboarders and obviously artists as well. Is there, maybe I'm like drawing at straws here, but like, did those particular sports, have you found like by shedding your identity, do you feel like more free as a person and also having less, I guess, perfectionist tendencies as well? Has that not just changed your approach to work, but also like, I guess, life and yeah, maybe how you approach work more generally?
Uh, I mean, I think it just shows that I'm probably a blocked creative. Like I've sort of worked so hard to getting qualified in a very rigid analytical space that I put aside, like many of us actually, I put aside all of these creative interests and pursuits and then realized I wanted to go back to them as an adult. I don't know if it has contributed to the way I work, but it has definitely enriched my life in a way that I hadn't expected. So if I were thinking back to the 25-year-old me, I wouldn't have thought that I would be someone in their late 30s who is skateboarding, surfing, and painting. I would have thought I would be in a massive corporation leading a massive legal team. That's how I imagined myself. But here I am doing all of these amazing activities, surrounded by incredible community. That's the other side of it that is so valuable to me, and starting a gaming studio. So I don't think that that was a dream that I imagined, but it's an amazing dream at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if that sense of community and also just generally the entire risk taking approach in surfing and skateboarding, does that impact your mindset as a founder? And I guess more what I mean by that is like, do you find it fills your cup in a way that allows you to take on like work challenges? And does that balance help?
Yeah, I definitely think that there are lessons that you take from skateboarding and surfing that you can apply and think about in life or in work. So with skateboarding, for example, you're going to fall so many times, but you know that the trick is achievable because someone else has done it. And so it's a sort of a mind over matter thing. So if you just keep trying, eventually you'll land the trick. And so it just gives you, in a very real example, what a growth mindset looks like, in that you shouldn't be put off if you just fail the first time, even if you fail the 20th time, or if you fail the hundredth time, because you know that your mind is playing tricks on you, and if you keep going and keep practicing it, you're going to land it. So that's the sort of thing that is so incredibly valuable when I start thinking about failures in the professional context.
Again, links quite well to the next question, which is almost just like fall down, get back up, or, you're going to fall, but obviously maybe in a way it is achievable if you keep at it. But, Judy, you're currently fundraising, and it's well known in the industry that only 2% of VC funding goes to female founders. I think we've quoted that stat before. And less than 20% to mixed gender teams, right? So it's low stats generally across the board. How have you found this fundraising experience specifically as a female founder?
I think it's a very difficult topic because it seems like there's a lot of talk and verbal support for supporting female founders. But my experience is that it doesn't seem to actually materialize in real support, i.e., big checks to actually fund your business. The reason why I say this is that when you dig down deeper, what you tend to find is that the support comes in the form of mentorship, learning, accelerators, or small grants through which extremely lengthy applications are needed. So, and a really recent example of that was I absolutely feel that it's definitely needed. So this is not saying that it shouldn't be there, but it was extremely frustrating when, for example, the Innovate UK Women for Innovation Awards was a grant of up to £75,000, but the application form was just as long as the Growth Catalyst Round 2 grant, which gave businesses 300,000 to £1 million, or even up to £2 million for later stage businesses. And it's sort of like, if you're a woman or a minority in a minority group, you still have to prove yourself before those big checkbooks are opened up, whereas white or male founders are taken at face value. So that's the most frustrating thing. I've even had conversations with investors who have asked me to pay in to be able to gain access to their networks, which again, I think is really wrong. And this was a women's focused investing fund. So it's extremely frustrating. The other side of it is when funding is actually offered, it's typically targeted at impact type businesses in areas or domains that are typically feminized. So, for example, health tech, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it seems that, I don't see why women's businesses need to be shoeboxed in a particular category when there are women starting businesses across so many different domains and that they're worth funding.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Judy, and being so candid about that, because I think that's such valuable information for, women who are navigating this process currently and maybe frustrated by it. And also for people who maybe have not done it, but they see all these things that say, women focus fund or women focus accelerator or whatever. And for sure, you're not saying, generalizing, but this exists, right? Where it's this almost a different kind of inequality that's being created by these women focused funds and the fact that it's small amounts. So it feels a little bit like lip service, but not putting your money where your mouth is. When it comes to these things, and that it's so hard. You mentioned the thing about the application being just as comprehensive as something where the check was for like $1 million or such a big amount, which again goes against the thing with barriers of entry and hurdles, right? You've already got so many things to overcome trying to
Yeah.
get there. And now let's make it even harder, or, for a small, like you've got to be grateful for like the small slice of the pie. Like that's what it feels like. And that just feels so frustrating. I'm not even in it and I feel frustrated for you. So, yeah.
That's exactly how it feels. Like you're getting a very small part of what could be a very helpful pie that helps you move the needle. And sometimes the barriers can be invisible. So what I've discovered is a lot of VCs won't speak to you unless you've been referred through a warm introduction. And I understand the rationale for saying that and requiring that, but the impact on women and minority groups is that our networks may not necessarily be that broad. We may not have a pool of people to be able to call upon. We may have been the first generation in our family to go to university and take up professional roles. And so by virtue of doing that, you're excluding exposure to a potentially great group of founders.
Yeah, as you were speaking, it really reminds me of the parallels in hiring and being promoted within companies as well, about how at the end of the day, there is a bit of like an old boys club, or like you're asked to prove yourself, particularly as a woman, before you get the title, whereas other people are promoted on potential rather than the results, and how those parallels play out in different areas. I've also noticed, and this is a bit of a tangent, but so I've been like upskilling on AI recently, and one of the things that I found particularly frustrating is I find like a lot of the content that's geared towards women to be, one, incredibly infantilizing, and two, it like almost curbs like your ambition levels or like what you should achieve. So for example, like a lot of the AI topics I see focused at women, it's all about like, oh, here, like, you know, here's how to automate one of your like slide decks or whatever. Whereas for the AI content I see geared at the general population, i.e. usually men, it's like, here, go build a 0 employee business and make $1 million or whatever. And I wonder if you've seen that, you know, while you're fundraising, have you experienced that kind of, I guess, lowering your expectations around fundraising? Have you been told to like basically raise less, or has that not been your experience based on being a female founder?
That hasn't been my experience, but I think it shows up in the we are holding a female founders event, and then the topics that they talk about are completely different to what they might have at a normal founders event. There might be, you know, encouraging you to find mentorship and sponsorship, and it's sort of very frustrating at this point because you just can't help but think I've got enough mentors and enough sponsors. What I need is funding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Capital is what moves businesses. Speaking of capital, so besides fundraising for yourself, you're actually an angel investor as well. So with Hermesa, which as a syndicate that focused specifically on backing female-founded startups. How did you get into angel investing originally, and what advice would you give to women who are thinking about getting started?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about angel investing because I was in a position to do so. So I feel very fortunate to have had that chance. And I was looking for a way to invest in businesses, but I wasn't able to commit to very large tickets. And so I was speaking to someone at a climate tech event actually, and her name is Insia, and she is the founder of Shell Works, which is an incredible company. And she said, you should look into Hermesa. So I did, and Hermesa is such a great network of really amazing women because it in a way solves two problems. One is getting more women into investing, and two, investing in female founded businesses. And they also allow for quite small checks in comparison to other angel networks. So that was very accessible to me. And in the meantime, it also helped me expand my network amongst a group of great women and exposed to a pipeline of female founded businesses who are doing really interesting things like Shellworks. So yeah, that's how I got into it and what attracted me to that network. I think there are loads of other networks as well, which do really great things as well.
You've obviously had exposure to a pipeline. You've probably reviewed a few memos, if not pitch decks, over your angel investing career. Has that helped you as a founder in fundraising now?
I mean, definitely yes, because I think you're seeing what makes a good pitch and what makes the pitch that could have been improved. So having said that, every business is different. So what works for one business doesn't necessarily work for another.
Julie, as we were talking, obviously we were talking about fundraising and obviously how challenging that can be, and in a way how frustrating navigating that can be as a female founder. I actually just wanted to ask you the flip side of that is what are you just enjoying and loving at the moment about building this business?
Oh, a really good question. I am just really enjoying the level of agency that I get with this business. So having the agency to build relationships and partnerships. So one of well, basically, because the first game that we're building is in music, we're building a lot of relationships across the music industry, and being able to learn about that industry as a newcomer has been super exciting and really interesting. And also seeing the product of what we're building, because we're actually building a game and it's in a way, visible and something that you can interact with. That's super rewarding, and the speed at which you can do it is incredible. And obviously the team that we've got, I get to choose who I work with, which is fantastic. And we've assembled a really, really great team. So those are the things that I'm really enjoying right now.
I love that. That's great. Julie, we could chat to you for a while. And in fact, we have. We've gone deeper into things with you and been curious. And Joe and I have obviously reflected on knowing you too. But for our final question, we wanted to know, if you've had such an interesting and varied career and you've got all your hobbies and all of those things, looking back, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish you had known early on in your career?
That's a really hard question.
You don't have to pick one. You can pick more than one. But is there at least something
Um,
that you wish younger Julie or naive Julie knew back then?
yes. Okay. So I think I've got a few.
Wow, it went from nothing to my mind is going. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the things that I wish I'd known when I was younger would be one, just start, and also always start before you're ready, because there's always something about taking action over overthinking something. And I think I mentioned this before, is that any action can typically, you can stop. It's not really particularly that permanent, whether it's, making a call to someone to explore an idea, or calling a potential supplier to see how they work. So one of the funniest things that I reflect on when I was building Adrena was, at lunchtimes, I used to call fabric manufacturers just to see and understand what they were doing and how they managed to produce their clothing. And I came across one manufacturer, I think they were based in Leicester, and he was just really bored, and he just decided to have a chat with me for an hour and talk about his whole production process. So I think taking those steps are really useful to help you explore and work out what it is that you want to do and where you want to direct your efforts. The other part is to ask for help when you need it. I think you'll be surprised by who is willing to help, talk about your problems, and reach out. And I think, Jerisha, you were actually one of the people who, when I was having a really tough time with some personal matters, you said, a worry shared is a worry halved. And that actually really stuck with me for a long time. So yeah, you will be surprised by who's willing to help. And your friends love being asked for help. So that's another interesting point as well.
I love that advice, Julie. I don't even remember saying that, but wow, I was wise back then. I didn't know that. But I love it because those two things are things I've embraced now too. But I never used to. I didn't in the past, Judy, because I was a perfectionist. Very independent. I can do this. I can do this on my own. And asking for help in a way is kind of like seen as a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
But now I will just load my problems on people around me so that everybody can help me, whether they
We'll
want to
share
or
it with
not.
you, yeah.
Exactly, because your friends and the people who truly care about you do want to help. Because in the same way, if my friends told me problems, I would want to help them. So I think it's just that mindset shift of not thinking that, oh, if I do it, I'm a burden. But actually, if your friends did it to you, you'd want to help. So it's changing that perception.
Mm-hmm.
I love those two things that you've left us with, Julie. And if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you or find out more about Hundun Labs or any of that, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn or drop me a line at julie@jamstash.co.
Amazing.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps others find us. Even better, share it with a friend or colleague who needs to hear this. Thanks, and see you next time.